Well, personally, I'm married. I've been married for about 32 years. I have 3 daughters, ages 26, 21, and 14, and I have Shiloh, our family dog. And professionally, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also, as you know, an author, and I'm an abstract painter. I think the best word to use in describing what you've just introduced is colorism. And I say that because it doesn't just affect the African American community. It affects all peoples of color because, as we know, all peoples of color come in different and varying shades. Even within my own immediate family, my 3 daughters, they're all brown skin, but they all have different tones of brown. And I think that in truth, this has come about because of the intermarrying and a hybridization of European peoples with peoples of color around the world. I think that what happens when the drum major dies shows us what was going on not only back in 1968, but what we are working with right now and what we're going to work with in the future, as W.E.B. Du Bois said, that the greatest issue that people will face and the world will face in the 21st century is that of the color line. When I began writing over 20 years ago, I would just start writing, and I wouldn't advise doing that. Slowly, before I got my MFA, I came to understand that there was benefits to outlining. After I earned my MFA, and my MFA thesis was a collection of short stories, I then set about to teach myself about plotting and the various points or various plot points in a novel. In learning about that, I came to understand the value for me in outlining. And so when I wrote When the Drum Major Died, I used an outline, and I feel like it was just incredibly helpful. This is going to sound very interesting to some people, but I read a book by I think her name is Julie Otsuka, and the title of the book was When the Emperor Was Divine. And the book is very small, but it's about Japanese Americans and internment, obviously in America, at the time that America was not only at war in World War II with Japan, but was on the brink, if not actually in the middle of defeating Japan. And I thought that was a very interesting take on, here you have this title, When the Emperor Was Divine, which was the backdrop for these people and the major character whose family was interned.
Austin.
Florina really wasn't the first character that came to me, and this may sound strange as well. The first character that came to me was Agnes, and I knew that she was not my major character. And let me just say, this is the first time that a character's come to me and I knew that she wasn't the major character. I knew that I needed to have someone to balance Agnes off of, and that's how I came up with Florina. And in fact, if you really look at it, Florina and Agnes form the major parts of one character, but it is Florina who is the more empathic part that I think the reader has greater ability to identify with and attach to throughout the story. Well, the book is fictional. I am 53 years old, so in the year 1967 I was 7, and by the time, unfortunately, that Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was on my way to being 8 years old. The thing that's most important to me about the story, and I want to refer back to Julia Otsuka's book, I think that oftentimes we can learn a lot about a group of people when we take a historic figure. When the emperor was divine, it was the Japanese emperor Hirohito. When the drum major dies, it is obviously the drum major for peace, Martin Luther King Jr. And so I think it's important oftentimes to better learn about a group of people, to set a backdrop with a historic figure, but not necessarily focus on that figure, rather bring the lens to what is going on in the everyday lives of the people in the backdrop of these major figures, and then look to see where what happens with the historical figure intersects with the lives of the everyday people that form the major characters in your book. And that's what I tried to do with When the Drum Major Died. I think, as I've heard many people say, that everything a writer creates is autobiographical. I cannot deny that. I am a child and many would say a beneficiary of integration. And we know that integration was something that, and equal rights was something that Dr. Martin Luther King and others really worked very hard for, and some would say that he gave his life for. I think the part of me that's in When the Drum Major Died is that part of me that has learned where the impetus to seek civil rights came from, and how I and others like myself in my age group became the beneficiaries of integration and civil rights. This is a picture of people who came before me, what their lives were like, and why they strove to bring about what I and my generation are actually experiencing and enjoying. My most favorite part of the book is when Florina, and I don't want to give a spoiler, says her final goodbye to Ennis. I don't want to, as I say, give a spoiler, but it is towards the end of the book. I remember writing that part of the book and thinking to myself how difficult this would be if I were in her position. I also would like to say that I learned an awful lot about the military and the branches of the military in the United States in researching that aspect. And so I came to develop a great respect for our military servicemen. My grandmother had what at the time was a very large library to me, because I was a child and small. She had this bookcase that was filled with books, and I used to just sit there and spend hours during the summer and when I was at her house, just going through those books and reading them. And then of course my grandmother loved to tell me stories. This was my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother. And so I think that that was a great influence for me, because I started doing this way before I even went to school. And I think that was an impressionable time, and I certainly see the roots of my love for books and reading and hearing stories, which is a precursor to writing them down at this time in my life. I really appreciate what the internet and new computer developments have done to help writers become more independent, or to help along indie writers, self-published writers. My first book, a collection of short stories, Keeper of Secrets, Translations of an Incident, was traditionally published. It was my MFA thesis. My last three books, which are novels, The House, Seasons in Purda, and of course, When the Drum Major Died, are novels, and they were self-published, or I self-published them. This would not have been possible 10 or 15 or maybe even 5 years ago. The internet has enabled people like myself to to self-publish and put our work out there without having to wait for when the traditional publishing industry says yes. And for someone who's a mother like myself with 3 kids, and who I don't think I could really carry out large book tours that are required by of authors by traditional publishing companies, this has enabled me to write and do it in my own time and in my own way. So I'm very thankful to the internet and computer developments. I would say that if you imagine it, you can create it. The main thing is you have to remember that while new internet and computer developments have allowed us to print books within a matter of 30 minutes, the writing and the creation of that book may take much longer. My second novel and third book, Seasons in Purda, I spent 11 to 12 years working on that book. Now, I'm not saying everyone's going to spend that much time working on a book. What I will say is that the human imagination works on its own time. We can keep that process going by being persistent and having a plan and not giving up. So that's what I would say to anyone who has an idea. Just don't give up. Keep working on it. I blog regularly, so you can visit me at www.anjuelle, that's ANJUELLE, Floyd, F as in Frank, LOYD.com. Again, that's www.anjuelle, Floyd, FLOYD.com. And I invite all of you to drop by. I'm working on a novel, or rather I should say I've outlined a novel that's been twirling around in my mind for quite some time. The title of the novel is Missa Solemnis. For those of you that don't know, Missa Solemnis is the name of a mass that Ludwig van Beethoven created between 1819 and 1823. It means mass, and it was his greatest mass. Masses have 5 movements: the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo, the Sanctus, and the Agnus Dei. And so my novel has these 5 movements, and it's focused on what happens when a very highly celebrated judge is almost killed, and in the midst of that, rendered paralyzed. He cannot move, he cannot speak, he can only move his eyes. And he has also molested and raped his daughters when each of them became 14. So the story shows what happens when this comes out and they begin to deal with the truth that they've been hiding for quite some time. What is the overarching story that I'm trying to tell in all the novels and stories I create? And I would say that my novels focus on, and my short stories focus on, women facing dilemmas. And the key to resolving those dilemmas always requires them to go back and work out some unresolved issue with their mother. This is the case with all the protagonists and heroines in my books. Healing relationships, making things right, but doing it through making things right and bridging that gap between them and their mothers and daughters. And thank you for having me.